Hello. Before we start the podcast this week, we have some exciting news, and Nicola Boyle from our marketing team is here to tell us what that is. Nicola, what's happening?
Hi, Ross. Yes, we have a live podcast recording. So it's taking place on the 12th of June after the first day of Festival of Work, and it's to coincide with our third birthday and also the 150th episode.
That sounds fantastic. I suspect by that time I'll probably be quite hungry and thirsty. Is there anything free of note along those lines?
Yes, I'm sure you'll have a bite to eat and a few drinks as well.
Great. What time does it start?
So we have drinks beginning from 5:45 and the recording will begin at 6:30 p.m.
And I suppose the only final thing is, if I want to go to the event, what do I need to do?
So we'll pop the registration link for the podcast in the show notes. So you'll find the link there.
Great. It'll be all over our social media, and you won't be able to miss it. Unless you book too slowly and there's no tickets left and we're sold out. So
yes, very true.
You have to book it right now.
Just as soon as possible.
Right now. Not as soon as possible. Right now. Stop what you're doing and book it. We'll see you there. Now on with the show. Oh yeah, and the events in London. I should have said that. Right, bye. Hello and welcome to the GoodPractice Podcast, a weekly show about work, performance and learning. I'm Ross Garner, and this week we're asking, can we get over shiny object syndrome? I'm joined as usual by regular contributor and the source of all shine in my life, Owen Ferguson. Hello, Owen.
I don't know how to feel about that introduction.
Feel positive.
Okay.
And we're pleased to welcome back return guest JD Dillon. Hello, JD.
I'm jealous of the fact that I didn't get like a personalized shininess introduction, but that's okay.
We don't know each other that well, but this is your chance over the next 30 minutes to...
I think your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is to impress Ross.
I'll try to earn my keep, but I continue. I don't even know if this is still accurate, but I continue to brag to people that I appeared as the guest on the most listened to episode of the GoodPractice Podcast.
That certainly was accurate at that time.
Yes, so I'm going to continue to hold on to that for now.
So the reason that you're here is you recently blogged on shiny object syndrome. And we were interested in it. I thought it'd be a fun discussion. So do you want to kick us off by explaining what that is and what you mean?
Sure. So I was facilitating a session at a conference a couple of months ago, and I believe my topic was around the use of data and technology to personalize and target, learning and support experiences. And someone in the audience raised their hand and asked me the question, what's the difference between self-directed learning and adaptive learning? And I answered the question best I could in the room, but in the back of my head, there was a mild explosion, because I think that question is an example of a problem we have as an industry, where we take ideas, whether they're new or old, and we create a word for them, and we wrap that up in a box, and we then start having conversations about which box should we use in order to solve a problem as it arises. And if you rewind a couple of years, it was social learning and mobile learning and even e-learning. And to me, the fact that we're still talking like that feels mildly ridiculous, given the fact that, again, if you consider mobile learning, it was never its own thing. We're still years behind the curve with regards to leveraging mobile devices in order to help people do their work. And today, I have a lot of friends who have come to similar realization that mobile learning is not its own thing. It's whatever you're trying to do to help people using whatever devices they have available. And if they can use a mobile device at work, cool, that has to be considered as part of what you're doing. So I think we would benefit as an industry if we stopped looking at these different ideas as being in their own little boxes, and then instead discussed things that are more about fundamental principles that kind of ground our overall strategy, and then use different tools and tactics that best fit the needs and the context of the people that we're trying to support, rather than sit there and say, is it time to use microlearning or is it not? Because I don't think anyone's benefiting from that conversation.
Yeah, I think most of the problems that you're talking about are that people are focused too much on what the new shiny thing is, rather than what it allows you to do better than what came before, or what it allows you to do that you couldn't do before. It's the application of that to a particular problem or problem set. So you've got, AI, there's lots of interest in AI, right? And not only is that an incredibly broad term, but different aspects of AI, very specific applications. So, something shouldn't be of interest because it uses AI. It should be that the new thing allows you to do something better than you could do before, or something that just wasn't possible before. And that's what's of interest about it.
Yeah, my current running tagline around the kind of AI machine learning conversation is AI with purpose. Because it's not just, we have it, therefore we are good. Because even I'm currently at the ATD International Conference and Expo, and it's interesting to walk around the exposition floor and look at the signage for different vendors and see the words AI or artificial intelligence showing up a lot. And I'm sitting there trying to figure out, well, last month you weren't an AI-enabled piece of technology. Now you are, but I haven't noticed a change in what you do. So what does that mean? And Megan Torrance in a panel yesterday gave a great example where she said some organization she was working with or talking to said that they were AI enabled. And she said, no, okay, so where's the AI in your solution? And they said, well, the avatars, the way that their mouths move, that's AI generated. And I'm like, that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of we get fascinated by this idea and this new thing, but we don't distill it down to a set of principles and kind of a purpose and how it's going to address a problem well enough to really get the benefit. And then unfortunately, the hype cycle continues, and it takes us several years to actually figure out what that thing was. And by then, a lot of us, or the industry in general, are off and staring at the newest idea, newest toy, newest technology that's now taking our attention.
But I am not sure if I totally agree with this, because the conference kind of set up is an interesting place to have this discussion, because it sounds like that the person that asked you that question, what's self-directed learning versus adaptive learning, that was it. He's there to learn about these two things, and he's like, I've heard of them, I don't know what they are. It might be of use to me. It might be something that I can put in my toolkit, and maybe it's something I can factor into my job and what I'm doing. But the vendors are like, we have AI and you should buy this because it's AI and that's the solution. And so there's two groups of people at conferences, and they're there for fundamentally different reasons. One is there to learn, and the other one is there to an extent, sell snake oil. And I'm saying that as a vendor, but obviously we have a far more nuanced approach than that. If you talk to us at one of our stands, it'll be a very, very different story. But, there's no one there who is totally like, I'm looking for the one solution that's going to fix this. I think buyers are more nuanced than that.
No, I think there are plenty of people who are looking for the one. I do think we're in a better place now with regards to the fact that because a lot of our core technology has been so bad for so many years. And in my background, if anyone doesn't know, I spent most of my career in corporate learning and operations roles and slipped into the vendor solution provider side of the world 3 years ago. So most of my time was spent dealing with the fact that my core solutions that I couldn't get out of weren't doing what I needed them to do, weren't changing with my workplace, et cetera, et cetera. So I think for years we were looking for that one. I think the one has failed us so many times, and now that there's a rise of so many more point solutions, things that are very good at doing a small subset of things, people are now starting to realize it's a greater conversation about how to pull together kind of a tech ecosystem of tools. Just like in our everyday lives, you don't use one app on your phone to do everything. You find this collection of apps that you leverage with purpose in order to live your life. I'm actually working with Danny Johnson with Red Thread Research right now on a research piece she's doing around what different types of technologies are organizations using in order to help people do their jobs, and kind of where's the overlap between what we would traditionally call a learning solution versus workplace technology people use to do their work every day, and how do those pieces come together in order to support an employee trying to work and function in today's business world. So it's an interesting exploration. I think it's about time that we start thinking about things that way. But I do think there are still people who are led to believe that this one idea, this one concept, this one tool is going to help you finally solve the problems. And I agree that all three of us are vendors. Interestingly, if all three of us were standing next to one another on a stage, I'm the bad guy because I'm a technology vendor, right? I'm not a service provider. I'm selling software. So somehow I become the worst of the vendors. And again, having been a corporate L&D person, I think vendors are a lot of this problem because, like you said, the marketing that comes out of a lot of them is basically defining these terms in the context of what they do, and not the principles underneath. Microlearning is a grand example, right? Microlearning became whatever each individual company said it was, which led to mass confusion in the industry around, is it a thing, is it not a thing? And then I've been underneath that conversation for the last 2 years, trying to help people understand what this actually means. And I am a vendor. We do talk about microlearning a lot, but I always work with my team at Axonify to say, let's release messages and resources that help people understand the fundamentals and principles behind things. And if they start to think that we are an option for helping them execute these ideas, awesome. If not, they're still gaining from the information we put into the world, not getting distracted by a short-sighted message that's wrapped around a particular perspective. So this is definitely an interesting place to ponder this idea, given that so many conflicting messages are flying at the same person trying to just do their job better and help people at work.
Yeah, but JD, to what extent do you think that the vendors are simply responding to, it's almost like they're going along the path of least resistance? So because they're being asked about microlearning, the simplest thing from a marketing perspective is to slap on a microlearning badge and say, that's what we are, and then let's continue the conversation. I think it's I agree with you that that there's something well, it's certainly not subtle in how the vendors respond to that, but I do think that people working in corporate learning functions do have a role to play in having that more nuanced conversation and cutting through the nonsense that's out there. It's just very hard because these things are packaged and they're almost meme-like in that they transmit very quickly. They're simple ideas that people can grab hold of, and therefore they're going in and saying, right, okay, I'm interested in VR. For what I don't know, but it's new and I want to find out about it, and that's what they go in looking for.
And that impulse is fine, I think. I'm just going to jump in and say that impulse from the buyer is VR is new, I want to know more about it. That is a reasonable impulse to have. It's just, what do you do after that?
So it's how far do you leap, right? I think it's as long as I have no issue with people exploring new ideas, first of all, right? I think everything has potential. I'm not the biggest fan of VR as an example, but I do recognize that in specific use cases, there's potential high value. In environments where it's too dangerous to replicate, one of the best stories that I've ever seen is a team that's using VR to help train X-ray technicians, because if you repeatedly X-ray a human being, they die. So in that environment, they can focus specifically on how they position a person in an X-ray scenario, and then the platform can help them understand what mistakes they're making and drive reinforcement of the right types of behaviors and skill. So I think there's room for a wide variety of ideas. I just think I agree that vendor's going to vend, right? So you obviously if you're whatever you sell, if you sell soda, if you sell pants, if you sell technology, you're trying to sell stuff. I personally, in my role, because I am a vendor, I work for a technology company. I think I'm in a little bit of an interesting role where I look at it as my job is to help people better understand the fundamental concepts around the types of themes that we discuss. So I'm a little bit of a different approach, and I help guide the messaging accordingly, because I believe that if you help people better understand things, get better at their job, learn what these ideas really are, that if they like what you're talking about and they believe in you as a partner, they're more likely to join up and want to leverage your solution. So I think I look at it a little bit differently than some other folks do. But yeah, I think we as an industry, as L&D professionals, have to be smarter than the marketing, right? You have to realize how many webinars are there every day, right? And when you look at all of the webinars, we've got to be smart enough to look past who's sending us the webinar email into who sponsored the webinar and who the speaker is. Because I go to a lot of webinars and sit in the background, just listen while I'm doing my work. And a lot of the times it's coming from a very specific perspective. And because again, not every L&D professional can get out to a conference, can engage in a larger community conversation easily. So if we start to rely on this type of webinar content, white paper content, blog content, it is easy to get misdirected because you don't, in a lot of cases, realize that webinar is actually one giant sales pitch. So the educational component of it isn't as high value as I would want it to be in many cases. So I think it's incumbent upon us to be better at identifying, again, what is this really as an opportunity for me? What are the fundamental principles under this new idea that's being presented as the next great thing? But at the same time, I don't put vendors, I hold vendors accountable to a certain degree as members of a professional community who should be in it more for the long-term success of the people they're trying to, sell to and the people they're trying to support versus just trying to sell something and get out of there. However, since you said it, if any of us ever just comes into the money, I would love to buy an expo booth and literally sell snake oil. Like, that would be great. That'd be like a meta reference. Just have a nice big booth there, literally. I don't know, is snake oil even a thing? I don't know. But it would be fun to just do that as like a semi-protest reference in the middle of an expo.
I mean, it wouldn't even need to be snake oil, would it? You could just put some sugar water in there and say, but it is snake oil.
Then it's meta on top of meta. Love it.
So, but I think you touched on a point, and certainly it comes from a place that I believe. I think if you want to go for the longer term play, right? If you're looking for longer term success, then you're almost cutting your nose off to spite your face to go for those short term, like, let's look for the simplest badge to slap onto this thing, because at some point you'll get, well, I don't know how true this is. My worry would always be at some point you'll get found out, and so you're better to be authentic and credible and actually work on developing something that you can actually believe in, and share widely what you've found out through the process of doing that. But that doesn't appear to be how a lot of the industry goes, and I wonder the extent to which they're simply just responding to signals that they're getting from the conversations that they're having with prospective clients.
Again, coming from my perspective within a technology organization, there's a wide gap in most cases between where we could go and the types of things that we can build and execute and whatnot, and where the market is and what people are ready to do. And we talk about things like AI. We're in a world where we can start to lift a lot of administrative tasks off of L&D, right? The need to sign people up for anything, to build curricula. And we're at the point where it's a question of, do you really need to build the content, or can we let the machine build the content and things like that? But our organization's ready to let go. Our administrators ready to let go and let a machine start to make decisions in the ways that it can. As someone who's played with adaptive learning for the last 7 years or so, we still see organizations that struggle with the, everyone has to check a box mentality, even though they've been playing in the adaptive learning space for quite a while. And if you can't get, like the session that I'm doing today at ATD is about personalized learning, and one of my big points is, one, it's about people, it's not about technology or content, and two, if you can't establish trust inside of the organization, and get past that idea that training is an exercise by which you defend the company by making sure everyone viewed something, if you can't get past that mentality, a lot of this doesn't apply to you. And you can't use these types of ideas. So that's where I come back to the idea that before we start launching into a conversation about AI and learning and development, those fundamental ideas have to be discussed within an organization. And it's not just the L&D team, who are often the hardest people to shift when it comes to their mentality about how they do what they do. Usually stakeholders aren't as difficult, because when you can say, I can make you more money or save you more money, they just say, let's do that, as opposed to haggling over learning theory. But you have to get L&D and stakeholders and compliance and HR lined up before you can try to do certain new things. And I always say it's best to start having those conversations before you want to implement something, because that's just going to slow you down, discourage people, get confusing, compete with IT resources. All of those things we're used to getting in our way because we didn't, just start buying people lunch way before you need them to get involved with you.
Well, this is I'm sorry to keep jumping to the defense of anyone that's looking for a simple solution, but the people who are at conferences are partly they're looking for the simple solution to whatever their various problems are, but they're also looking for one that they can sell internally to those other stakeholders. So if they come back and say, I think that we need these 10 different pieces of tech because they all do really specific jobs, but they do them really well, and it's just like, how your iPhone works, you're all used to using apps, and so that model works for everyone, that's going to be fine. We'll bring in IT and HR and all these kind of people. That sounds really difficult and expensive. And then even if you get like organizational buy-in, you have to sell it to the end users that they're going to use all these 10 different things who are all going to go on top of the travel system and the expenses system and the room booking system. And, it gets insane. And so the drive to have a single solution is coming from a good place.
Yep, there is an organization out there that has perfectly effective use cases for AR, VR, just add a pile of things together. There's one organization out there that can probably benefit from everything that isn't using any of it today. And if they, like you said, if they suddenly come back with a shopping cart and say, look at all the things we can do, generally speaking, none of them are going anywhere because you're going to overwhelm just the entire ecosystem and you're stuck with where you are. So that's why in a lot of the things I've written recently, I reinforce the idea of small experiments, because my career is based on the idea of I have nothing, no one is asking for this, but I think we have a problem. And at Disney, it manifested in certain ways. At Kaplan, it manifested in certain ways. I talk a lot about wikis to this day because of certain things I did at Kaplan. And when I went into the universe of wikis, it wasn't because the company said, we have a knowledge management problem. And it wasn't because anyone gave me money or resources or capacity to do my own little project. It was because I couldn't find anything on SharePoint. I then went and talked to front-end employees. They couldn't find anything on SharePoint. I started to connect the dots between decisions that were being made, training requests that were being asked for, and the fact that no one could find anything on SharePoint, and started to realize we have a fundamental problem with regards to how information moves inside of this organization. I think I'm in a position to go after that. And then I started very small and built my way towards what would eventually be a bigger solution, a bigger strategy, and a fundamental part of what we were doing. So I think that the thing for me is, and I just wrote this on my LearnGeek blog, I'm a big fan of small experiments, trying out things based, again, on fundamental principles of how they could help people do their job before we make the leap into big, bad strategy, big, bad technology. But experiment and iterate quickly so that we can move faster into that scalable solution, rather than what a lot of teams do, which is pilot on pilot on pilot on pilot on pilot, and then never make a decision, or it's 2 years later, and by the time your pilot process is over, the problem has moved, it negated all of your effort in the pilots, and now you got to do something different.
How are those things different, sorry? So is it just the length of the pilot and the cost of it that you're talking about, that it takes so long?
I think just the word pilot versus the word experiment come off with two different feels. And I think I said in my blog post, even if you just call it an experiment, people are used to a pilot having a very kind of set structure of, we try the thing, we do it for a little while, then we stop, and then we go back and look at our results. And then meanwhile, all of that effort that was put into that pilot dies. Because whatever you put into place, you take away, and now you have to reinstall again if you expand. I look at it as kind of continuously iterations until you make the decision: are we stopping or are we expanding? So I think it's keeping forward momentum is the difference. Because again, I see so many organizations that are comparing different technologies or different concepts. And again, when I worked at Kaplan, I had an executive who was known for saying, "I've never met a pilot I didn't like." But how many things actually got installed and actually made a difference? It was rather limited. So I think it's taking on these concepts of new ideas, new technologies with a slightly different perspective, grounding everything with those fundamental principles and conversations about kind of the changing nature of work and the changing nature of what we're doing, getting stakeholders on side, and then when it's time, trying out things based on those fundamental principles with clear goals, and keep the motion going until you find what's going to work or what's clearly not going to work, and pivot accordingly. Versus you find a new technology, I did this as an L&D person. We should pilot this. Okay, technology that I had no real understanding of, that no one was really asking for. Tried it out for a couple of months. Naturally, it didn't work out real well because we had never talked about this concept as an organization, and then it died. And then we moved on and had wasted a couple of months of our time. So that's the different perspective I'd like to see people take that I think would be beneficial to everyone, solution providers, practitioners and the people that we're working with, especially the people that we're inflicting our work on as the frontline employees, who are often, rather than getting better help and better solutions, they're getting tested on a lot, which is another reason why I'm not a big fan of A/B testing, because I don't think we have time for that, especially when you start to look at the certain types of topics I tend to focus on. When it's related to safety, I'm not a big fan of A/B testing safety solutions in learning and development. I think we can do small experiments and rapidly expand them rather than spend a lot of time error testing back and forth between solutions. That's not really helping anybody.
Yeah. But what you're describing there, doing a small experiment, presumably you're doing that not with absolutely everyone, but with a specific group, and then you're measuring the difference between what you're achieving with that experiment versus what you had been doing already anyway.
Yeah, I don't put a ton of
He's trying to trick you, JD. He's trying to trick you.
I don't put a ton of efficacy behind I'm testing something with this group and not this group over here, because when someone said this yesterday to me, all else equal, all else is never equal when it comes to performance on the job, right? Even if you isolate your large retailer down to a specific subset of stores, and those stores perform similarly, if there's a big storm in one of those locations versus the others while your pilot is running, your results are skewed already. So it's really hard to do that in such a way that makes it comparable versus focusing down on the group that you're working with and how their results are changing, and then how that can be applied at a greater scale across an organization, given that the groups of people are all doing the same thing, but in mildly different contexts. So you're never going to say store number 1, which is the top performing store in the company, and store number 50, which is the lowest. We're not necessarily going to get them equal, because there's very different things happening in those two environments. But the people inside of those stores can be operating at similar levels and doing their best to overcome whatever other challenges may be, hurting their sales.
Yeah, well, I was thinking it's not really the topic of this podcast, but I mean, I my concern with
I think the topic of this
experiment
podcast has turned into how to vend at a conference.
Yeah, the part that concerns me is if you run an experiment on absolutely everyone, right? If the thing that you're trying out is worse than what you were already doing, then you're inflicting harm in some way, shape, or form. It's particularly in something like safety, for example. Like you're reducing the level of safety, or you're increasing the risk of accidents happening, etc., rather than finding some way of comparing one method against another.
So I think it's a matter of, again, if you distill things down to not launch at an idea because it's a new idea or a new piece of technology, fundamental principles that you can experiment with before you launch into the grand. Because like I said, at Kaplan, when I got into knowledge management, I tried SharePoint left and right. I bent that thing as far as I could bend it, and in order to figure out what was actually working, right? Where would people actually engage? How is information moving? How are people sharing? And then I started to realize where the behaviors were and how people wanted to access information, when it was going to help them actually make a decision and solve a problem when they're on the phone with a student, these types of ideas. And then I built the new solution based on that and started with a small group, realized success, tweaked before I went further, and then kept moving and kept tweaking out as I was going. So it's more at that end where if I had hurt that, if people were losing student confidence and we were losing enrollments and things like that based on the small experiments, obviously we're stopping and we're pulling back and figuring out what's working. I'm never a fan of saying, let's walk into the C-suite with a brand new idea and say we're going to launch to everybody. Here, it's going to save the world. Because I think that's where, again, business people tend not to want to talk about learning strategy. They want to talk about how you're going to make me more money or save me more money, generally speaking. And there's more nuance than that. But so I'm a big fan of, and again, even if no one's giving you permission to necessarily do this or giving you resources or capacity, can you try some small things out? Can you prove that there is a value to the business? Can you build your business case? And then bring the business case, not necessarily the idea or the technology, up the chain and start to show that it's not just that this worked at another company that you've heard of, which a lot of people leverage case studies and things like that for. It's working here in small ways, and here's what our employees are saying. Because that's the other thing I think is highly powerful when you're trying out a new idea. Numbers, awesome, but if you can pull numbers with the anecdotal pieces from employees, especially the employees that have reputation that senior members of management hear from, Those things combined tend to turn people's heads in a way that leads down the path of actually, getting something new rolled out at scale in an enterprise.
I think the other side of that is that with when you roll something out, people tend not to use stuff that they think isn't worthwhile or is a waste of time. So you're going to get a lot of feedback from the employees anyway. If they are using it, then that's a good sign that they're finding it useful.
Yeah, and nothing is more effective. Again, if I show up in a group of frontline employees and say the training department thinks this is a great idea, why would they care? But if I say people like you benefited from this and got results that are similar to the results you want. Again, in one of my past roles, I had one particular frontline manager who used to be a training person. So she was more likely to try things. She understood where we were coming from. So I leveraged her a lot. And then when things were effective with her team, would turn her around to the other teams and say, I didn't say it like this, but I basically said, do you want to be like her? Look how successful her team is. You want to be a successful manager too, right? Why don't you try the things that she's doing? That would be awesome. I think it's a more effective message than, again, the training team says, or learning theory says, or a company that isn't ours said. All of those pieces are part of the story, but building a business case with internal success through experimentation, I think, is a more effective way to overcome the sizzle and the hype of new ideas.
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff, the solid grounding, the learning theory, information that you might get from vendor, are all things that help you to make a decision that you want to try something out, but they're not reasons why an employee should care or pay attention to something, right? What they ultimately need to hear is about how it's going to make their working life easier in some way, shape, or form. Either it's helping them to perform or hit targets that they've been struggling with, or it removes an amount of pain that they're experiencing, in some other way in their working life. And if you've got something that addresses those problems, the more likely they are to have success. First of all, in the experiment that you're running itself, and then you're gathering the stories off the back of that.
Exactly. I mean, I in a lot of my presentations today, I still use a quote from an employee at Kaplan who was just reinforcing that this L&D concept that we executed made them feel more a part of the organization, even though they were new, because there was a big difference between veterans and the kind of institutional knowledge they had developed over time. And as a new person in the organization, you felt like you were falling short because you couldn't do the things that they could do. And we had somehow managed to level the playing field a bit, and they had a very kind of solid reflection on that. And I still use that today just to show what you can do and how powerful an anecdote can be from a frontline employee, but it has to be backed up with greater evidence to show that the thing you're doing is actually working, in addition to the fact that people like it. Because that's the other thing. People liking it isn't sufficient, because people have liked plenty of classes that have never done a darn thing for the actual results of the business. So those things have to come together, but we can't forsake one for the other in trying to build a business case and convince people to try something new.
And therein lies the danger with just chasing after whatever the latest, shiniest thing is that, it's not in service of what an end user's need is or might be. It's not necessarily, it is about the fact that it is new. And so, simply using something because it's got a new component or it's the latest buzz thing isn't enough to determine what you put into an organization.
It's a nice summary. I thought you were about to go into the Hawthorne effect, so I'm going to move us on very quickly.
I can. Would you like me to?
No, we'll save that one for another day.
Okay.
So we'll wrap up and move on to a regular feature, what I learned this week. Thank you very much for JD. That was a great conversation. I have a follow-up on what I learned this week from the last time I was on this show. So Owen, you might remember, and JD, if you listened, that I had asked people on Twitter what they had learned, and Gemma Critchley got in touch. She had found out the true origin of garden gnomes, but wouldn't tell me what it was. Well, after a nationwide appeal, I have some answers. So, it seems that in the 18th century, one way that wealthy folk living across England, Scotland and Ireland would flaunt their money was to hire a full-time ornamental hermit. These people were usually attracted by the offer of free accommodation and a decent wage in return for consenting to this job description it's from Sir William Gell's A Tour in the Lakes, made in 1797. The hermit is never to leave the place or hold conversation with anyone for 7 years, during which he is neither to wash himself or cleanse himself in any way whatever, but is to let his hair and nails, both on hands and feet, grow as long as nature will permit them. Sometimes the hermit would just sit quietly in the hut, and other times he might be called upon to serve wine at parties. And eventually this notion of the ornamental hermit went into fashion, and the small terracotta versions replaced him. Which is a great story, but it's slightly dubious because garden gnomes were popular 100 years before the ornamental hermit craze. So there were ornamental hermits, but the link between them and garden gnomes is a bit more vague than maybe some of the tweets I got might suggest. So thanks to Paolo, who is Bark All Night on Twitter, for that story. That might be what Gemma was talking about, but I don't know. And from ornamental hermits to our very own garden gnome, Owen, how are the radishes?
Good grief! That's there are no radishes this year. This year is all about the cauliflower and the broccoli.
This whole story was a setup to that gag.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, 2 weeks I've been working on it.
I mean, was that a gag?
I thought it was funny.
I thought it was the most effortful transition I've ever heard.
Thank you, JD. Thank you.
Oh dear. I mean, I don't know. It's definitely in the top 10 of Ross's effortful transitions. This is true.
Owen, what have you learned this week?
Right. What have I learned?
I've thrown you completely.
I watched the Game of Thrones finale. I have been kind of observing with a mild air of bemusement how the most recent series of Game of Thrones has been trashed by its fan base. And so last night, I watched the finale and I thought that was pretty good. I quite enjoyed that. I have felt this last season has been rushed, but it's also had some of the best moments of the entire program. I've quite enjoyed it, and I started reading the books almost 20 years ago. It was a satisfying conclusion. It didn't feel as if nothing about the ending felt off to me. But I went into IMDb and I saw this screed. I mean, it's the finale is the worst rated program of the entire series, and it has been absolutely trashed. And I was going through the reviews, and there were all these 1-star reviews, and I went in to find out what else have these people reviewed, and it turns out that most of them have not reviewed anything else whatsoever. And I thought, what a terrible state of affairs your life must be in for you to go into IMDb to register a 1-star. I mean, there's no way that program was a 1-star piece of programming. I've just learned how petty some people are.
Yeah, I thought it was great too. I really enjoyed it. JD, what have you learned this week?
I've never watched Game of Thrones, but I have been surrounded...
You're put off by the 1-star reviews.
Yes, I entirely believe what the internet tells me. But I have been surrounded recently by the characters from Game of Thrones because I've had an interesting conference week. So the day before I came to ATD in Washington, D.C., I was at a conference called MegaCon in Orlando, which is a fan convention. And I'm not a person who gets excited about a lot of things. I'm not really into anything. When people ask me what my hobbies are, I say I watch hockey and go to Broadway musicals. Like, I don't have a huge because I spend a lot of my time in this world with learning and development. So what I do enjoy, however, is watching people be so into something that they'd spend time and money and resources to do the thing. I find it kind of energizes me to do what I enjoy doing. So it was interesting to go. I spent one day at MegaCon. I was kind of hiding in the periphery because I wasn't dressed as anything. I don't know what most of this stuff is, but I'm very impressed. It's interesting I enjoy fandom to the point where, these are average everyday people who spend a lot of time and money on their outfit and their costuming and whatnot. And they're getting people coming up, taking their photos with them, and everyone's so excited to do it. And people are buying fan art, and they're really showing appreciation for these people's skill, even though these are, again, highly skilled people, but not people that you would have heard of before. And then the capper for me, big reason I was there was because there was an evening panel with the cast of Back to the Future, which is the best movie ever made. Feel free to come at me with that one. But it was also very interesting to see the cast reflect, because usually you don't get all of them in one place. So it was interesting to see them interact and share some interesting insights into their experience. But yeah, I just really enjoyed kind of going to a place where people are so into what they're doing, and then coming to this conference where people are not dressed anything like that, and have very different conference experiences over the last week.
No, so I'm hearing you say more dressing up at L&D conferences.
I think people should be dressed up as L&D concepts at these conferences. Giant VR headset, or like what's a good one, like
an ornamental helmet.
That's not an L&D thing. That would not be appropriate at this event. But could someone come up, like someone walk around dressed like the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve for me, and like high five for that. And then I think the one other thing I'd highlight is we came up with a new, because you have to have interesting swag at your booth whenever you're in Expo. So the Axonify team came up with what I think is the most interesting item that is high in demand right now. Are you all familiar with the Roomba?
Of course.
Yes.
Okay, so you have the benefit because you can see me. We're giving out something called a Foomba, which here's my phone, here's the Foomba.
Oh, check that out.
It moves around your phone screen and cleans your phone screen for you. So I've also learned that this exists.
Ah.
Oh, you need to send us a short video of that so we can put it in the show notes, JD, so people can see the self-cleaning phone desk.
I can point you to a tweet from Melissa Milloway where she featured the
perfect.
Foomba.
Yeah, we will pop that in the show notes. And that's it. That's all from us. If you want to get in touch with us about anything we've said on the show, I am on Twitter at RossGarnerGP. Owen is
at Owen Ferguson.
And JD is
at JD_Dillon.
To find out more about Good Practice, including details of our performance support toolkit, streamlined LMS, and our e-learning, all of which are shiny and new but should be applied with a suitable degree of evidence-based evaluation, visit goodpractice.com. You'll also find links to all of our previous podcasts there. JD, is there anything that you want to plug?
Sure. If you want to learn more about any of the work that I or my teams are doing, 2 websites to check out. One is axonify.com. And then also my personal blog and what resources are curated at learngeek.co.
Great. Axonify are doing lots of interesting things with data just now and evaluation and stuff. So yeah, worth checking that out. Thanks once again for joining us, JD, and thank you at home for listening. Until next week, bye for now.